From the Brady Bunch Handicapping 4-box, I'm Joe Christofek, joined by Jeremy Plunk, Caton Bradar, and Brian Nadeau. And today we're going to talk about handicapping the Toteboard. We handicap on paper. We look at the horses on the racetrack. We try to gather as much information as possible. And this time we're going to explore the money, where it's going, why it's going there, and if we need to pay attention to it. And Caton, we're going to start with you because where it all begins in horse racing is parimutuel wagering, which is different than betting against the house. We're betting against each other. I think it's good for us to start this video with a brief explanation of what parimutuel wagering is.
Yeah, Joe, and I think that's the biggest misconception, that people think sometimes that it's better for the house if everybody loses, but just the opposite. It basically means all the money that's bet goes into one common pool, and we are all playing against each other who have bet into that pool. The house does not stand to benefit at all if we all lose. In fact, they're happiest when more people win because it keeps the money going.
And of course, in horse racing, because of parimutuel wagering, JP, there is a takeout rate for win, place, and show, and the exotic wagers as well. And I think it's important for people to be aware of the takeout rates for all of those different types of wagers at racetracks across the country.
Yeah, takeout's just a fancy word for a tax or a fee placed on every wager. Generally, it's going to be between 15 and 25%, depending on the state and depending on what kind of bet that you make. So, in essence, for every dollar you bet, 15 to 25% is going to be taken out. It'll be divided between the track, the horsemen, and the state that you're in. The governors and the politicians always like to get their hands on the pot. And then that other 85 cents or 75 cents, whatever's left, is divided up amongst everyone who hit a winning ticket. So the more of you that win, the more that's divided up, the smaller the payout will be.
And Brian, that brings me to my next point. In this day and age in horse racing, we have a lot of different kinds of wagers, including multi-race wagers, some of which have a guaranteed pool. Tracks like to set a guaranteed amount to get the attention of the horse players to say, hey, there's a big pool here. You have a chance to either hit for that pool if you're the only winner or split a big piece of the pie if you have to share it with multiple people. Let's talk about guaranteed pools, and then let's talk about carryover pools, because when there's a carryover pool, there's actually free money for you to attack.
Yeah, well, first, the guaranteed pools are great because, like you said, they're guaranteeing a pool, and a lot of times it's a lot more than would normally be in the pool. I know just basic, Naira on the weekends is going to guarantee anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 in a pick four, and especially at Saratoga, you might see $1 million in the pool, and there's a lot of poker players out there, so it's kind of, to take one of their terms, it's a lot of dead money in those pools, meaning maybe a lot more uneducated money is out there for the sharp people to go after. So I'm all for guaranteed pools, and they're definitely the kind that I like to get involved in.
And as far as carryover pools go, obviously, if you're a horse player in this game, you need to take advantage of every single aspect of it. And when there's a carryover pool, it's free money. So it's money out there that maybe you've put money into the pool, maybe you haven't. And Caton, when there's a carryover pool, I think everyone needs to be aware of it and construct a ticket that gives them a chance to win, as long as it's well within their budget, of course.
Well, absolutely, and as long as it's something that realistically you think you have a shot of hitting, because if you have no clue about the 6 races in a sequence of a pick 6, then maybe it's better not to jump in, no matter how big the pool is. But you definitely don't want to play unless you feel it's worth it, as far as the rewards and the carryover are concerned. And the more days you get the carryover, the more advantage you have versus people who are not playing on a regular basis, because you have been watching, you've been studying. So knowing when the carryovers are there is extremely important. And going back to what Brian said about as far as the guaranteed pools, at the smaller tracks versus the larger tracks, that's sometimes when you get the best opportunity on those guaranteed pools, because they've actually instilled those types of bets to try to entice more people to jump in. So you get even more uneducated players, so to speak, just taking a shot, kind of like a lottery ticket. Love to look for those smaller tracks that offer the guaranteed pools too.
And Brian, I think there's an example of this with certain tracks that you like to hawk on a regular basis as far as the size of those pools go. Why don't you explain a little bit about where those advantages can come in?
Well, I monitor parks a little bit, especially on Monday and Tuesday, and I'll preface it with saying I look at the pick 6. It takes a long time for a park's pick 6 to build up. We're talking a one-day carryover might be $200. But on the other side of the coin, if you get 5 days worth of carryovers and the pool's at $8,000 or $10,000, what I've noticed is it really only takes one horse, one price horse, and you can sweep the pool, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. I'll just give a personal example. I hit it last week for a little over $1,000, and I by my math, there was about 9 or 10 winning tickets, and the parlay was $161. So that goes to show you. I mean, there were three horses, I believe, under $4, 2 horses under $3, and the longest price of the sequence, Joe, was $9. So if you're savvy, if you know what you're looking for, I mean, I don't suggest playing a $300 ticket into a $6,000 pool, but if you can play a manageable $36, $24, $48 ticket, come up with one horse, and then have sound handicapping the rest of the way, you'd really be amazed at what you can come up with in the payoffs.
And JP, we talk about this all the time on Night School, and what Brian just kind of mentioned, it's a small risk for the potential for a big reward, and that's what you can find sometimes with these carryover pools, or knowing which tracks to attack at what times, which Brian just gave an example of.
I find the most realistic stab that you can take as a horse player is trying to turn like 20 bucks into 500, a 25 to 1 investment. You can hit those kind of bets that aren't that ridiculous to find. It's not like you're trying to pick something that's 1,000 to 1 to happen. And again, you can turn that small investment into a bigger payoff. Just like Brian was talking about, a $48 ticket paying $1,000. Again, you're looking right at that 25 to 1 type margin there. And I think that's realistic for a player who's looking into some of these pools and some of these wagers. If you're willing to risk 20, 25 bucks, you can get a $500 return. If you want to swing for the bigger type things, you may have to spread and spend more money, or just have it be your lucky day when the long shots happen to come in. But realistic gamblers picking realistic horses can turn 20 into 500, and hopefully we can turn some of those heads throughout this video today, where we can show some spots where that can happen.
Well, it all starts with the morning line as far as wagering goes, with a human being who's trying to accurately predict what the public will do on a given race card. I'm a morning line maker. I've done it. I've seen the challenges. I've missed my share of morning lines. And usually when morning lines are missed, it's for one of two reasons. A, it's a 2-year-old or 3-year-old race with a lot of first-time starters, or B, it's with horses coming in off of long layoffs and you're not sure what kind of attention they're going to get. Brian Nadeau, you study races on a daily basis. You are a horse player. Talk a little bit about the morning line. From where I sit as a horse player, you'd almost rather have a bad morning line than a good morning line, because there are opportunities to take advantage of those kind of situations in multi-race wagers.
Yeah, Joe, I think the most important thing is you need to be sharp enough to tell a good and a bad morning line. I know you take your work very seriously and you put a lot of effort into the morning line. Well, the fact of the matter is not a lot of people do that. And I think that's where fans can get, or race, horse players can get a little deterred, and they say, this morning line, this horse was 12 to 1 in the morning, and now he's 4 to 1. Well, you know what? That horse probably should have been 4 to 1. It was just a bad line. So I think you need to know what you're looking for, and need to know who is live and who isn't. But is that because they're really live, or is that because the track, handicapper made a poor morning line? Saratoga is a great example. We're coming up on Saratoga in a month or so. You're going to see Todd Pletcher, at 7 to 5 in every 2-year-old race they run there. Well, that doesn't mean he's live. He's supposed to be 7 to 5. But when, let's say, maybe Bill Mott is 4 to 1 from a 15 to 1 morning line, well, that's live, because Bill Mott is never 4 to 1. So I really think we've said this a million times, Joe, and it applies to basically everything we talk about here. You have to know your circuit and know what you're doing, basically, and then you can make more astute judgments as opposed to just fly-by-night kind of ones.
Well, Kate, and for an example with a bad morning line situation, if you see a horse in a pick 4 sequence that's 15 to 1 on the morning line that you like, that is going to be 9 to 2, with people that don't know as much about the circuit and know as much about the sequence or know as much about the horse, they might not even look at that 15 to 1 and think about including them. When you see a situation like that, do you try to take advantage of it?
Oh, absolutely. And more, I think those opportunities do come up. Too often people see a short morning line price on a horse that they like, and they sort of give up or abandon hope of actually betting, very much because they're so sure that that horse is going to go off, maybe even shorter than the morning line. That's the biggest mistake you can make. You have to pay attention to what's happening on the Toteboard and the reality of the situation. At Churchill, in particular, especially on the late night posts, the downs after dark, I've seen it an awful lot, because there is so much money in the pool that is just floating around there that has no premise behind it with people really knowing what they're betting on. They bet on a name, they bet on a jockey, and it's more money than we're used to seeing on some of those cards. And so even last Saturday, race after race, horses that I really thought were top picks or among the top 2 or 3 horses were going off at 5-1, 8-1, even 10-1. If you get discouraged and think that means that they don't have a shot, you're missing a great opportunity. So I think you have to watch for those few and far between these days, but those chances where you do have those overlays.
Well, JP, that brings us to the meat and potatoes of this video, which is how to manipulate the tote board and understand the information in your wagering and use it to your advantage. Let's talk about a race ending and a new race odds appearing on the tote board. You have the morning line, you have the opening odds, you have what is called early money. Talk about early money, how much you pay attention to it, if it's important to you, and in what scenarios it may even be more important.
Well, early money's that first click of the tote board that you're looking at when the new odds open up. It's not what it used to be. Early money used to be only money bet at the track, pre-simulcast era. We're talking about the 1980s, late 80s. And that would all be stable money. That's what was hot money, because grooms and workers in a stable area had to come and make their bets at the beginning of the day and get back to work. So they made all their bets even for advanced races at 6 o'clock at night when the windows opened at a night track, or 11:30 a.m. for a day track. And that money was there and showed up on the tote board right away when the first click of the odds came in. That might be money in the know. Nowadays, it could be anybody at any OTB parlor at any place in the country. It could be a guy on his lunch hour. I used to work at an OTB in York, Pennsylvania as the mutuals manager, and I used to have businessman after businessman who came in at the beginning of the day and made all their bets for the day right away and went back to work. If that's happening at hundreds of places around the country, that's going to skew what the early money looks like. There are situations where early money is in the know, but there are many times nowadays where the early money isn't in the know, and I don't think it's quite as indicative as it used to be. I date myself a little bit saying that I remember looking at the tote board in the 1980s, but it's true. It's not what it used to be. You don't know where that money's coming from. Sometimes you can trust the early money, sometimes you can't. I personally wouldn't hang my hat on it, but I don't know. Maybe the rest of the panel trusts it more than I do.
Well, Brian Nadeau, I'm going to go to you next because I think there are two scenarios maybe where early money may be a little bit more important. And JP makes some really good points about this day and age and how wagering across the country funnels money in early. And it is different. There are owners and trainers, obviously, and grooms that do still bet early. And I guess it depends on the situation and the racetrack. 2-year-old races, it would seem to me that it would make some sort of a difference to me. And layoff horses, horses that are coming in off of 6-month layoffs who drop in class 2 notches. Are those horses live, or are they there to win, or are they going to be dead on the board? Those are two situations that I personally look at more than others. I track the odds in every single race, but I'm paying more attention to those kinds of races. Your thoughts?
Yeah, 2-year-old racing especially, and again, I'm going to bring up Saratoga as it's right around the corner, and everybody wants to win at Saratoga predominantly, and maybe we'll see next year's Kentucky Derby winner at Saratoga this summer. So I think for the most part, horses at Saratoga are well meant. Personally, I think early tote action right when they open up is a good sign. Like JP said, I don't hang my hat on it either. But on the other side of that coin, I will say this: early I like better than late tote action, and that goes with layoff horses too. It's always a good sign to see a horse that hasn't been seen for months on end taking money. I mean, maybe it's dead money or dumb money. I don't know, but I think it's a good sign. But conversely, I think late money, and I hope I'm not jumping the gun here, but late money to me is a lot of people looking up at the board and saying, well, this horse should be 3-1 and he's 7-1. I'm going to go bet him. I don't know if that's meaningful or not. We see that drift a lot of times. So that's why I say early money, especially in a place like Saratoga, especially for unraced 2-year-olds where, frankly, we don't know anything more than the average betting public, for that matter. I think it's a good sign as opposed to a bad sign. But, again, like JP said, it's really personal opinion and where you gravitate to in your own wagering strategy.
Well, I'm going to bring it around the panel. I'm going to go to Caton next, and then I'm going to go to JP. Caton, you've heard Jeremy and Brian talk about early action. They have similar and conflicting thoughts both at the same time about that. What is more important to you, early odds or late odds? And I know there's different scenarios, but talk a little bit about each and how you evaluate the early money coming in and the late money coming in. Which is more important to you?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit of a contrarian here, I think, because to me, the late money in a way is more important because it's going to impact how I'm going to bet the race. But as far as the odds are concerned, I'm going to trust my opinion above anybody else's in there and hope that if there's early money on a horse that I don't like, that I'm right and they're wrong. And I'm going to stick with my opinion. But I'm going to play the race differently depending on how the late money comes in. So that's what's going to be most important to me. But I think an important point with early money, and you see this more at really big tracks like a Saratoga, or saw it a lot at Gulfstream last winter, where there are very big bettors who are able to influence the pools pretty significantly depending on when that money is played. And I've seen, and maybe it's a mistake, an honest mistake, or many times it's somebody changing their mind or watching the pools. But I've seen large amounts of money that have driven odds down in the first couple flashes that suddenly disappear so far as their impact is concerned. Maybe they've made another decision or changed the way they want to play the race. But whatever the reason, when that money suddenly comes out for one horse and goes in against another later, that's going to change things pretty dramatically. So I, as a rule, try not to really pay too much attention, even in maiden races, to early money, because it used to be, as JP said, smart money. I don't know that it's smart money anymore in the way that we used to look at it. So I'm not playing the kind of money that those people are playing. I have to really watch what happens as we get closer to post time.
I think for me, horses that are dead on the board, that's telling me more than early money is. If I think a horse is going to be 5-2 in a race and they open up at 9-1, or I think they're going to be 8-5 and they open up at 5-1 and they stay dead on the board for a long time, and then like Brian Nadeau says, people say, hey, this horse is 5-2 on the morning line, or on paper this horse should be 2-1, and they start to slowly drift down from 5-1 to 9-2 to 4-1 to 7-2. Sometimes those are horses that you can either throw out of your gimmicks completely or not consider to be as much of a threat as you did when you first handicapped the race on paper. JP, your thoughts on that first of all, and then secondly, going about tracking the odds from 25 minutes to post down to 2 minutes to post. Is there some sort of information within that time span that can also help you in watching odds and how they might fluctuate up and down?
Well, you guys make a lot of great points. Caton's point about some of that pool manipulation, you'll see at the small tracks too. A $5,000 win bet off the bat at Mountaineer puts a horse at 1-5 when the Toteboard opens, and it changes how everybody for the next 15 minutes looks at their wagering. They're trying to figure out a way to beat this horse. Next thing you know, that money disappears and shows up somewhere else. The odds change, things juggle around. Maybe the exactas are now skewed a little bit because people were getting into the gimmicks to avoid that short 1-5 price. So you can see that happening. That's why, chasing the tote and chasing what other people do sometimes can be a little bit dangerous. You've got to be trusting. If you're going to follow anybody in horse racing, if I'm going to follow Caton or I'm going to follow Joe or Brian or the entire public, there's got to be a trust initiative there. You've got to have some trust in who you're following. If you're following the masses and you don't know where the money's coming from, it becomes tough to trust for me. That late money that you're talking about is more of a market correction a lot of times. This horse should be 3-1. People see it at 5-1, and it comes back down to where it will be. We'll talk a little bit later about willpays and how you can tell which horses are going to drop late in the money. And it's almost a guaranteed deal where you can look at the willpays and find out where those market corrections are going to happen. Tracking the odds throughout the wagering, Joe, I think is an important thing to do. I don't religiously take it on my program and write it down at 12 minutes, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, that sort of thing like that very often. On big days, I do. Like at the Belmont Stakes or at the Kentucky Derby, when those odds seem to be painted all day because there's so much money in the pools, I like to take and write down at 20 minutes to post, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and see where any of the movement is at all. A lot of times you'll just see one horse move 2 points in 20 minutes and nobody else moved. That horse will become very live, I would think.
I also, to a point that Caton and Brian Nadeau both made about connections, big bettors, I think it's important for us to note when West Point Thoroughbreds has a horse in, or some of these larger partnerships have a horse in where they have 50 owners in the group and they're all excited about their young horse racing, and those 50 owners have 20 friends each that they tell about a horse. A horse like that might be 8-1 on the morning line, might look like an 8-1 morning line shot, and opens up on the Toteboard at 2-1. I think it's important to note that those situations are ones that you need to evaluate separately from some of the others, Brian Nadeau.
Oh, for sure, Joe. And you get, West Point might be at the top of the list. They're great guys. We all love them. But yeah, they might have 100 people in on a horse, and so you get 7-5 instead of 4-1. They actually had a horse at Belmont pay about $34 the other day, first time starter. The true odds on that horse are probably 400-1 that they didn't bet.
Brian, though, Terry Finley gave out that first-time starter in night school when he was on the Belmont. Someone asked him, who are your 2-year-olds to watch? Terry gave away that one. So night schoolers cashed a big one. Not enough night schoolers apparently made the play, though.
Yeah, I think he paid $33.80. He kind of ran off the screen, too. It might have been the first open 2-year-old race of the meet. And then trainers, too, Joe. I mean, we love Kieran McLaughlin. That's a barn that gets hammered. You walk downtown in Saratoga and you'll hear Kieran likes his horse. So, I mean, certain barns like to talk. They like to talk about their horses, rightfully so. But you have to take that all with a grain of salt. Every Kieran horse is 5-2 or 2-1 because they're Darley, Godolphins, they're bred in the purple, and the barn likes them. Of course they do. So they're going to be bet. Doesn't mean they're live, though. So, again, it's knowing your connections, your circuits, and really deciphering through the good and the bad. Like JP said, the market kind of sets itself sometimes, and you just need to be sharp enough to know if that's what's happening here or if something is really live.
All right, JP, we're going to take through some examples and some scenarios now, or some of the things that you talked about with willpays. So I'm going to throw a scenario at you. I want you to explain it to the racing fans. We're going to do some visuals. We're going to let people know exactly what we're talking about. But let's start first with willpays, and do they correspond to the morning line odds? How do you look at the willpays for, let's say, a daily double, a pick 3, pick 4, pick 5, and how they correspond to the morning line odds in that particular race where the sequence ends?
Well, tracks that offer the rolling daily doubles, which is a daily double on every race throughout the card, races 1-2, 2-3, 3-4, are really a valuable service to horse players now, and a lot of people don't realize it. Because what it does is it gives you a pool that already has $10,000 to $100,000 bet into it and tells you what the odds should be. So you see the willpays for the second race, for instance, and you can see which horses bet the heaviest to which horses bet the least amount all the way top to bottom in a race. It's going to reset the line for you. Now you take that and compare it to the morning line odds. Let's, for instance, take this example. You've got 2 horses that are 2-1 and 5-1 in the morning line. But the 2-1 shot is paying $30 in the daily double, and the 5-1 shot is paying $28 in the daily double. I promise you, the 5-1 shot will not be 5-1 at post time. There's enough money in those double willpays to tell you that that 5-1 shot is going to be bet at least as equal as the 2-1 shot will be, and you're probably looking at co-favorites in a race. No matter what the early money says, no matter what the betting is at 10 minutes to post, I almost guarantee you 99% of the time, by post time, that daily double will tell you exactly what the win odds are going to look like. And that's how you can follow those willpays from race to race, from the doubles, and then look at the pick 3s and pick 4s, and you might get 3 different chances to compare how the public has been betting. And when you have a pick 3, a pick 4, and a daily double ending all in the same race, you get 3 sets of willpays to evaluate. 3 different pools that combined might have a couple $100,000 in them. That's far more predictive than what the morning line is or what the final odds will be.
Caton, how do you utilize this information in your horse play? Are you looking at those daily double, pick 3, pick 4, pick 5 willpays and adjusting what you're thinking? I think, and we'll get to Brian Nadeau on this in just a moment, and you can comment on it too, the serious horse players sometimes are staying out of the win place and show pools. They're staying out of the exactas, tries, and supers, and they're trying to utilize those multi-race wagers with horses they really like. How much do those willpays tell you as a horse player?
They tell me a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to jump into those pools. But they tell me as far as win, place, show, and particularly win and exactas within a certain race, where I might be able to get a little bit of an edge. If I see a horse that's going to be, say, the second favorite in terms of the payoffs in the pick 3, but he's a pretty decent odd on the Toteboard at this point, I'm maybe going to jump in, especially if I liked him in the first place and thought he was definitely a win candidate. And now he's 4th or 5th choice on the board in terms of the wagering, but he's one of the favorites in one of the other multi-race wagers. Then I'm probably going to back him even more than I would have going into the race because I think I'm going to get some value. It also, though, gives you the opportunity that if you weren't quite right in the earlier races and you see the patterns developing, you see a horse as a favorite in pick 3 sequence, I'm not maybe going to use him with some price shots that I like coming up in a later pick 3 or a pick 4 as we go forward through the card. And that's where maybe I have an opportunity to make a little bit more money than I would have normally just playing that horse individually or just playing that horse in the early sequence.
And Brian Nadeau, to speak to the same points?
Well, personal opinion is the longer the bet, Joe, the less I pay attention to it. And what I mean by that is in a pick four, when we're talking about a cash out race that's four legs after it started, I don't know how much credence that has, because anybody on a budget might just single the favorite. And it's tough to see who's live. But to JP's point on the double, that's right smack in your face. That's right there for you to look at. So I'm going to give a double payoff a lot more credibility than a pick three, and especially a pick four, because that's much farther down the line. Pick fours, a lot of times you can play them for 50 cents. So I think a lot of that factors, but a double payoff, especially maybe a double into the teeth of a group of first-time starters, that's pretty important to me, and I will pay close attention to that just to see if I like a firster, for, well, again, Bill Mott maybe, and the double is, $140 to Bill Mott, but it's $20 to Pletcher, then I know the horse is almost a complete toss. He's a bomb on the Toteboard. Like JP says, when that race opens up, he's 30 to 1, and so he's not live.
Brian makes a really good point there. If you get a situation where it's the cash out race in the pick four, and there's pick three and daily double will pace, the double will pace are going to be a lot more indicative to you than the pick fours, because like Brian says, that's one race away. I would focus, if you have different favorites in the double or the pick four, I would lean towards that horse being favored in the double as the one that's going to take the most money in the win pool in this particular race, because like Brian said, a lot of people are going to gravitate to the shorter price horses in the pick four out of just necessity and budget, and you will always see favorites in the pick four are overbet, especially later in a pick four and in the first leg of a pick four. People tend to spread in the middle legs. They want to survive the first leg, and they want to have the favorite covered in the last leg. The spread legs for most people are going to be legs 2 and 3 in a pick four.
And Brian made a really good point, too, about the minimum wager on what these are contributing to the way the race is going to play out. But when you're talking about the exotics that do offer a 50-cent minimum, they're going to get played a lot differently than those that have $1 or a $2 as their base. And that's also really important. And I know it's basic, but know what that minimum is at that particular track, but also know what they're listing the payoffs to. Because I've actually made a mistake at some tracks when they're showing a $2 probable payoff versus a $1 probable payoff, and it varies an awful lot.
It should be the minimum. Whatever the minimum payoff is what the probable payoff should be. The 50-cent minimum on a pick four, they should show the 50-cent payoff, not a dollar. And to your point, Brian, JP, and Caton too, people are going to bet $50 daily doubles. People are going to bet $100 daily doubles. People are going to bet $10 pick threes. People are going to bet 50 cent and dollar pick four and pick fives. You're only trying to hit that wager once. In a daily double and a pick three, when horses are live, it's hammer time for a lot of these guys. So that can also skew the probable payoffs as well. And another reason why daily double and secondly, pick three probable payoffs are more important, as you all said, than pick four and pick fives. JP, there are certain races that are absolute chaos on paper. You look at the morning line, you see a 7-2 favorite, or a bunch of 8-1 shots, and so on and so forth. What can the daily double, pick three, pick four, and those will pays tell you about these kind of races? Because in a lot of those pools, you're not always going to have the same favorite.
What I like to do is I like to take the morning line odds of the horse that's listed, take the payoff, and divide those. Get a ratio to see how far different this horse is from the morning line. Let's give an example. The daily double to the one horse is going to pay $100. He's 10-1 in the morning line. That's a 10-1 ratio. To the two horse, say he's 5-1, and the daily double is going to pay $25. It's a 5-1 ratio. So even in a wide open race where horses aren't getting bet, you can see that that horse who's 5-1 in the line is getting played a lot more percentage-wise and ratio-wise. And you go down the line and get a ratio for each horse. Morning line, take the total payoff for the daily double will pay, divide it by the morning line. Get that ratio, look at those numbers down the line, and it'll tell you what horse is most live based on their morning line odds. It'll tell you which horses might be moving a little bit, but a lot of times that'll give you a good overlay price, and definitely horses to use underneath. If those horses were somewhat live, but they don't necessarily point you to the winner, but a horse has a good ratio of getting bet harder than they were expected to be bet, a lot of times second, third, fourth in those wide open chaos races, they're horses you want to use as your partial wheels and your keys underneath.
Now we've talked about will pays. That's history. Those bets have already been made. We know what the payout is. Brian Nadeau, intra-race, when you're looking at playing an exacta or a daily double specifically, you're going to see the potential payoffs. They're going to change from 18 minutes to post to 15 to 10 to 8 as more money funnels in on those exactas and daily doubles. But how much do you pay attention to that when you're considering making a wager in that race? Are you looking at the probable exacta and daily double will pays with the horses that you like?
Well, I think you have to, Joe. You're not doing your homework, to be quite honest with you, because you know in this game you need to bet when you're getting the best of it. And if the 2-7 exacta with a even money and a 4-1 is paying you $7, then you really shouldn't make that bet. So I think you have to look at that. With that being said, I'll probably just look at it once, Joe. Especially, I'm dealing more predominantly on a NYRA circuit with bigger pools. In your exacta pool, it's kind of like what JP said, in regards to the Triple Crown races. The odds aren't going to change that much. So if I look up and I see an acceptable exacta price with 20 minutes to post, I don't know if I'm going to look back at it, to be honest with you, because at most it might change $2 or $3. That's not enough to drastically affect my opinion. So I will glance at it, and like I said, I think you should glance at it because you need to know what you're getting yourself into. But after maybe 1-2 at the most peaks, I'll be okay with what I'm getting.
And Caton, in addition to that, he's talking about exactas. What about daily doubles into the next race? Do you pay attention to that to look at what horses might be live into the second leg?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always going to look at it to see where it's at. And also, as Brian said, you don't want to miss an opportunity if you love a horse and suddenly you see for some inexplicable reason that the payoffs are going to be huge to another horse that you really like. Well, I mean, you have to take advantage of that depending on what the odds are. I will say, though, that other than using them as a gauge, as JP talked about with, setting a morning line, so to speak, or figuring out what the actual odds are going to be, I'm not going to get too involved in many of the doubles other than to look at it and help me with other wagers. But the exactas is probably where it comes more into play for me as far as just seeing exactly what I stand to gain by making the bet and whether it's actually worth it.
Now, either Brian Nadeau was trying to swat a fly away from his computer screen or he wants to say something. Too. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, yeah, not a fly yet, but give it time. On the other side of what Caton said, because she makes a great point, she said if I like a horse and it's paying more than it should, I want to take advantage of it. Well, the other side of that is, Joe, especially in a double, if I like a horse in the next race and it's not paying what I want, well, now I might jump back in and say, you know what, instead of waiting to bet this horse to win, I'll probably fiddle around with the doubles here because I know right off the bat I'm not going to get the price I want. My horse is really live or everybody's on to what I saw. So now I need to take another approach on how to make money on that horse because it's quite evident I'm not going to make any money on that horse in the win pool.
JP, there are win pools, as Brian said. There are place and show pools as well. Now, we see win odds at the racetrack. They're prominent, they're prevalent, they're right in front of our faces, but the place and show odds are not. But we do see the pools. Do you ever look at win versus place versus show? And I know you're not a big show bettor and not necessarily a big place bettor either, but can value be found in those pools as in relation to what the win odds are and maybe finding horses that have less money on them than they should in those pools?
Yeah, there definitely can be because really the place and show pools show a lot of randomness if you actually look at them a lot of times. A horse who's the favorite in the race could be the second choice in the place pool and the third choice in the show pool. It makes no sense sometimes. And that's not the once a week occurrence. That'll be once a day you'll see that in the pools. It doesn't always say the favorite in the win pool is the favorite in the place is the favorite in the show. Probably once a day you're going to see a situation where that's not the case. If you are a place or show bettor and you see a horse who doesn't have that much, all you can do is look at the dollar totals. You don't get the odds. But if you look at the dollar totals and say your horse has $2,000 on it to place and is the fourth highest amount, that means he's the fourth choice in the place pool, and you think the horse is the winner, maybe you get a little bit more in an inflated place price. But of course, anytime you bet place and show, you don't know who the other horse is that you're going to be coming in the ticket with and sharing the money. So just because your horse has a low place amount or a low show amount, the favorite could run second or third and really cancel out what your value is going to be anyway. So it's tough to bet the place and show pools based on that. Obviously, one thing you want to look for is a show jumper a lot of times, a bridge jumper who bets an exorbitant amount in the show pool thinking that a horse can't lose and has to get the guaranteed 5%, has to get the guaranteed $2.10 on a $2 bet. those situations come up, a few times a week around the country, and some bridge jumpers will try to take advantage of that. The bridge jumper is the guy putting all the money or the gal putting all the money on the sure thing. A lot of folks then will wheel back and try to bet other horses to show in the race in the event something happens to the big favorite and they run off the board. That's how every once in a while you'll see that ridiculous $36 show payoff or $100 show payoff on a long shot because a bridge jumper's horse finished out of the money. I don't get into those pools that much, but it is an interesting way to look at a horse. If a horse has a lot of money to bet on it to win, but isn't backed up in the place and show pools, I like that. We talk about smart money and we talk about aggressive wagers. When I see a horse open with $1,000 on him to win and $86 to place and $42 to show, that's early money, and that's smart money that I'm taking a look at, because that doesn't mean a bunch of people played this horse and it was a confluence of different opinions. This was one person's opinion on the nose, and you'll see this a lot at small tracks. Big win bet, nothing to place or show when it opens up early. That's one time to look at the place and show pools, the early money, and just see who's heavy in the win pool then.
Well, let's continue on with that theme then with small tracks. And Caton, let's go to you. Obviously, when there's a lot of money in the pools, the odds are not going to be affected by larger wagers as much, which JP just kind of alluded to. How do you handle small track wagering, tote board watching, will pay information at a smaller track, say a Charlestown or a Penn National, so on and so forth, versus a bigger track like a Belmont, a Gulfstream, or, Southern California? What are the differences to you?
Well, one thing remains the same, and that is that a large amount of money relative to wherever you are at one time is going to impact the odds dramatically. And so even at a Gulfstream, if that large bet comes in very early and it's the majority of the money in the pool at that moment, that's going to make that horse a heavy favorite. You're going to see it immediately. The difference at a small track is that that's going to happen almost every single time that anybody does that wager. So that's where at the smaller track, there's almost no point in actually wagering if you're wagering until the last minute or until very close to post time, because you are never going to have a really good idea of what the odds are going to look like at post time until you're almost on top of the race. So that's the number one thing when I'm playing a smaller track, is I'm going to wait a lot longer to make my wagers than I would when I'm at a Gulfstream or a Saratoga or any track in Kentucky probably. But, and the one thing, too, to stay away from, although we used to do this years ago, we sat at Prairie Meadows and would sit in the clubhouse, and this was in the very early days, and it was kind of fun to watch and put in if you put in $20, sometimes you could see it on the tote board. So there was actually a little, I don't think anything smart about it, but just kind of an ego trip to watch the money go into the pool. But it's going to be very challenging also to win at those tracks making just win wagers. That's the biggest difference as well. I'm going to play more exotics, and I'm going to see an opportunity where there's a horse I like that's good odds, that if I make a bet on him to win, it's not going to kill my own price.
Right, that's a good point. And Brian Nadeau, the multi-race wagers, if you're a pick four player and you're looking at a pick four sequence at one of the smaller racetracks and you find out that there's only going to be $5,000 in the pool, but you like several long shots within the sequence, does that deter you at all? Because to me, if I hit 4 10-to-1 shots in a row and I get paid $2,500 for something that should pay $10,000, that's not going to be as attractive to me. Pool size is important, as we mentioned earlier, in those multi-race wagers.
Yeah, Joe, basically you said exactly what I was going to say. You just beat me to it. You need to look into the pool size of these smaller tracks. If you have the mother load of all handicapping days in the pick three and you bang out 3 20-to-1 winners and you get back $722, that's something you'll maybe never do again in your life. At Belmont, you might make $17,000. So at X track Parks, maybe you get 700. It's risk reward. So I would be more apt to play maybe a smaller ticket and punch it more times with viable contenders at a small track, as opposed to playing long shots at a small track, because you're not going to get the fair reward when the pools are that much smaller, goes back to, I mentioned Parks earlier. That's why I have to wait for 5 or 6 days for this pick six to build up to 15, 20,000 in the pool. Otherwise, there's no point in sweeping a pool on a $48 ticket when you're going to get back $600, whether you had a 2-to-1 or a 27-to-1.
JP, as a public handicapper, and all of us have been public handicappers and continue to be, in fact, a lot of people come up to me, especially when I used to work at Hawthorne and to do the TV every day, and say, why are you giving out these horses? I like the same horses. You're killing my price. Are you betting against the horses that you pick? And I think it's important to tell people that we have to make these picks in advance. So if I pick a horse and I think the horse is going to be 6-1 and they wind up at 5-2, yeah, I might be shopping around the tote board looking to attack the race in a different way. As public handicappers, a lot of times if you're in a newspaper or you're doing TV, you have to pick every race every day. You might only like 3 of those races. How much do public handicappers, in your opinion, affect the odds, especially if they're well respected within a given circuit?
Oh, I mean, a Brad Thomas at Monmouth is going to influence the Toteboard. I mean, guys who, you talk about the Southern California radio shows. There are horses that run at Santa Anita or Del Mar, and these horses open up and they're bet, and I'm scratching my head, and a couple people in our Express Bet race chats will come in and say, oh, that horse was given out on Privman's radio show, Mike Wilman's show, Roger Stein's show. I mean, if they're followed around on the radio in Southern California, it's kind of like Brian was talking about with the Kira McLaughlin going down Broadway in Saratoga. I mean, word gets out. So with good handicappers and where people trust and play their money, you're going to see that. A big thoroughgraph push on a horse, is going to influence the odds a lot. Jerry Brown and his group has a tremendous influence on the big bettors in America. And when there's a real strong thoroughgraph angle, whether it's something you pick out handicapping or something that's kind of pushed publicly, those horses get bet heavily. So I think you have to respect the public handicapper who can influence the tote board. You may not agree with them. And look, the best public handicappers out there are lucky to hit 28, 30% winners on top. They're working hard at it. They're doing a great job. But it's like baseball. If you're a 300 hitter, you're going to the All-Star game. So these guys are wrong 7 out of 10 times. If they knock the odds down on a horse you like, skip the race. Go to somebody else. Or when your horse's odds are too low, that's when you get into the exotics. I never recommend, oh, my horse is bet down too low, so I'm going to go pick another horse who's a higher price. No, that's what the exotics were invented for. And then if the exotics don't produce any value as you look at the potential payoffs, then you skip the race and move on to the next one. To me, you don't go fishing for other horses just because somebody picked your horse and the odds are too low. I want to go back to one quick thing on the nighttime tracks and the smaller pools that you guys talked about earlier, if I can. The nighttime pools, you're going to see a lot of 2 out of 3s in the pick 3s and 3 out of 4s in the pick 4s. So smaller tickets that include your long shots, don't be dissuaded. You may hit 2 out of 3 in a pick 3 and collect $100. So there's an opportunity to play those multi-race pools at the smaller tracks and hit the 2 or 3s in the consolation ticket, but I wouldn't invest $48, $50 into a ticket. $12 ticket to maybe get 100 back isn't a bad way to go. Most of the money at small tracks is going to be in the try and super pool and the win pool. It's not going to be in multi-race wagers. The smaller the track, the lower the pools in the multi-race wagers. Tries and supers will have 3 to 4 times the amount in the pool as a multi-race wager. So if you're going to bet the small tracks, get a big field size, hammer the tries and supers. I play small tracks every single week. They're my favorite tracks. It's what I grew up on. I love covering the big races, but I love betting the small tracks.
I'm going to go back to something JP said before we got into the small tracks, and that is when you like a horse and the odds are too low. And I'm going to bring this point to you, Caton. There are some races where you have an opinion on a horse, but you have an opinion on many horses. There are some races where there might be 5 horses that you would consider in a race, and you rank them 1 to 5, obviously, but there might be a smaller window between the horse you like the best and the horse you like 5th best. Do you shop for value at all, or do you really stick to your opinion and, like JP said, try to maximize the horse you like the best in whatever pools and scenarios are presented in front of you?
Well, it's a roundabout answer, but I think it depends. It depends on how strongly you feel about your top choice or choices in the race versus a race where maybe you're a little wishy-washy or there's some doubts about even your top pick. When you have 4 or 5 horses that you really believe any one of the 4 or 5 has a legitimate shot of winning, then you absolutely have to price shop. You have to look at the board and watch and bet accordingly with that. But when you have a strong opinion about a horse, then I don't think you can let the odds dissuade you. You just have to figure out how to bet him in the best possible way to maximize the reward. And, a really good example of it for me personally was the Belmont Stakes, because I had a strong opinion about the horse that ultimately won, but I really couldn't figure out what else to do with it. Fortunately, he went off a good enough price that you just had to bet him to win and then use him in some multi-race wagers, and you were in really good shape. But if I had really spent a lot of time or tried to figure out how to play it based on, the second, third, fourth, fifth choices, I don't think I'd have made money on the race when all was said and done, even though I had it handicapped right. So it really just depends on the strength of your opinion, I think, the strength of your convictions, and then what the Toteboard is saying.
All right, well, we've had some really good information in this video. We're getting close to wrapping it up. I'm going to bring it to Brian Nadeau and talk about multi-race wagers, Brian. And I think all of us, to a certain extent, like the multi-race wagers. We see the opportunity where there's only one takeout in the pick 3, the pick 4, the pick 5. There is an advantage there. But the disadvantage in playing a pick 4 or pick 5 is not being able to see the tote action, not being able to see the horses on the racetrack. How much of a disadvantage do you think that is to you, or do you not pay attention to that at all when you're diving into the multi-race pools?
Well, Joe, there's no doubt it's a disadvantage. I've heard you say that many times, and you're absolutely right. You can't look at the horses. You can't see the tote action. But conversely, the wagering opportunity is so great, and the takeout is so minimal in the grand scheme of things a lot of times that it's one of the few areas where you, the player, are getting the best of it. And I think JP said this many times, that the pick 4 is the best bet at the track because you get the most bang for your buck. It allows the small-time players, which, I'm going to fall into that category. It allows a small-timer to compete with the big guys. Today's a perfect example. We mentioned the pick 6 at Belmont earlier, you and I. I can't play that pick 6 today. It's too hard. It's too expansive. It would cost too much money as the $2 block bet. But for 50 cents, I can play the pick 4 and easily have 64 combinations that only cost me $32. So it's the type of bet that, sure, you might be getting the worst of it as far as your eyes and what you can and can't see, but on the back end, the risk reward, I think, is just too much to ignore, and it really is the bet you should dive into, that you can make a score with for a relatively modest investment. It's like JP said, the 25 to win 500 in a pick 4. It happens every day.
JP, we're going to go to you, and then we're going to go to Kate, and then we'll get a final thought from Brian, and we're going to wrap this up. Any final piece of advice from the three of you on utilizing the information in the willpays, the Toteboard, tracking the odds, so on and so forth? Any final piece of information or thought that you can give that can help people cash more tickets inevitably?
Use the Toteboard to know what you're getting yourself into. You would never go to a restaurant and order the daily special without a price on it, knowing how much it costs. You're not going to pay $72 for chicken nuggets as the special. So you don't want to be getting into a situation of the prices pop on the Toteboard and you go, wow, that didn't pay what I thought it was going to pay, or geez, that paid more than I thought it should pay. You should always have a sense of what you're buying with your money. That's the beauty of the Toteboard. That's what it's there for. It's your menu. Use it to shop.
Caden?
And, to take it a step farther, you always want to use it to know what you're getting yourself into, but at the same time, you should never allow it to completely erase all the homework and opinions that you formulated going into it. It's very easy and tempting to fall into the habit of looking at the Toteboard and not seeing any action on a horse you really liked and felt strongly about going into it, and then talking yourself out of it. And that is the worst thing you can possibly do. If the horse ends up running competitively, you're kicking yourself when it's all said and done. So you use it as a tool to help you know how to bet the race. But at the end of the day, the game is about opinions. And if you have a strong opinion, you have to stay with it, no matter what the Toteboard says. Those are the times you actually live for, when everybody else is wrong and you're right.
The Toteboard should tell you how to bet, not who to bet, to follow up on what Kate was talking about.
From chicken nuggets to potentially kicking yourself. A couple of tough acts to follow, Brian Nadeau. You are the closer, buddy.
Yeah, darn. I agree with everything that they said. You have to pay attention. It's one of the few tools that you have in front of you that maybe not everybody realizes. We all know how to read the form. Everybody knows how to read the program. We all know how to do that. But if you can pick up a few nuggets along the way that, again, I said dead money earlier, the novice, the once a weekend person or once a month person isn't savvy about, that's only going to help you. And again, this is a game that's hard enough to beat as it is. So if you're not using it to your advantage in betting, in making bets that give you all the best of it, then you're really going to struggle because, at the end of the day, it is a really hard game to beat. You need every single, club in your bag, so to speak, to help you win at this game.
For Caton Bradar, Jeremy Plunk, and Brian Nadeau, I hope all of you have enjoyed this long-form video on playing the Toteboard. Use the information, cash more tickets. That's what Night School is all about. Enjoy the show.
Looking for a fun and easy way to learn more about horse racing? Night School, Tuesday nights. Enjoy access to top racing insiders via chat, video, and radio. Night School caters to fans at all levels. Miss a class? Read the archive. Night School, Tuesday nights. See you then.